Hello everyone, I'm Admiral Ellis of the Time Travelers Organization, and welcome back to another episode of something that is really yet to be titled, and I don't think it's going to become a definitive series, but this week at least I have a question to answer, so we can't jump into the Admiral's Blockade Runners just yet. So, a question was posed to me earlier this week, shortly after the other video came out, or not this week necessarily, but shortly after the other video came out, and it was by a person by the username of Shadow Mistress. I have a question. If you lived in a universe with a multiverse theory and decided to go back in time to change the past, would you change the future of your own universe or just create a new one with a new timeline? Well, okay, there are a bunch of different ways to think about this, and there are a bunch of different ways to sort of subscribe to the multiverse theory. And in all honesty, since universes are very separate, it is impossible to accidentally... Okay, it's not impossible. It's very unlikely to accidentally jump in a regular old time capsule from one universe into another, because the boundary is the void, and the void is pretty impermeable. You've got to use something like a dimension cannon to get there, I guess, destructively. And if you want to make a stable vortex, it's an incredible amount of power, and it's a lot of stability, and sometimes it just won't even work. Some universes are just straight up incompatible. But the thing is, more universes are created every time you get a quantum flip. And as you may know, particles like that are under the influence, or not under the influence, but are subject to the Schrodinger's cat sort of deal, where they are in both states until you look at them, and the moment they are relevant, the moment they are observed, they pick one of them. And the parallel is freedom when you pick another one. When they pick the opposite one, there are two possible states. So, to sort of go on a little tangent here about how multiverses are created, it is theoretically possible, or, sorry, let me get to that in a minute. Multiverses are created when one flips and the other flops, and that is the smallest amount of difference you can possibly have in the universe, and that's what spawns all the other different universes. So you have universes running in parallel that are almost identical, except for one tiny bloop. And it's entirely possible that those two universes merge later because the conditions come back to nominal. If you have two universes that are exactly the same, they might as well be the same, and they essentially are. There's no way to tell them apart. There's no real difference between them, and because they are so similar, the void space between them is minimal, so they might as well be on top of one another, and they are. So, and then when it's a flip and when it's a flop, they split off again, and that's happening, you know, millions of times a second, every single second, which is why there are so many different universes and why all this stuff is possible. So, anyways, to get to the question at hand, now that we're 3.5 minutes into the video, the decision to go back in time will spawn many different universes. The act of going back in time will not. Because it is a decision that is made, and that's what requires quantum flips. That will create all sorts of different universes. There will be different universes where you took longer to do it. There will be universes where you didn't. There will be universes where you completed it successfully. And the one you end up living in, if you completed it successfully, is the one where you completed it successfully. I mean, that's kind of circuitous logic, but it's not very intuitive. But the universe you're in is the one you're in, and I'm not really sure to phrase it another way. So, you know, I could take this pen, for example, and say, okay, well, in some universes it'll land like that. In some universes it'll land like that, and in some universes it'll land like so. However, our universe, it lands like that. And that's the one we're in. And it could have changed mid-flight. There could have been something that came in and influenced it. But we are currently living in all the universes where the pen I just dropped hit the table like so. So, it's odd to think about. Anyways, but to get back to the point at hand, as I've had to keep doing multiple times now, when you go back in time. If you successfully go back in time... Okay. It's weird to say this. You're always in the universe that you are in. You will not encounter... When you come back, you will be in the same universe you started in, but that future will have changed. It's... Okay, hold on. When you go back, then you start making decisions there. Then you're spawning a bunch of different universes. When you go forward, you're stuck on the track of whatever universe you were in. So, yes, it's possible to go back and change the past. Hold on. But coming back forward is what causes problems. Theoretically, if you were in an unbounded time capsule, if you were in a ship which was not tied to a particular vortex. Now this is where it gets into fourth dimensional stuff. What I just said would happen. If you were in a ship that could travel along any time vortex and wasn't bound to a specific one, which usually they are, you have to have a very loose kind of drive to be able to travel, to be able to sort of switch back along universes like I'm talking about. You come back through the same one, you make a decision, and you go off on a different one. And, you know, it's the grandfather paradox. It's very weird stuff. Now, what happens is, if you're an unbound drive, nothing really happens. You are just displaced. If you're in a bound drive, which is the majority of time travel capsules, and it's really the only ones that are useful for altering a specific future, you are bound to a vortex, and that means the decisions you made are only applicable to that universe, and the universes which spawn off from it after the point at which you left from the future, and any points that you observe along the way back to the future. Now, if you hop back, you change something, and you hop back forward, the only changes that are going to be visible are the ones, or the only universes that are going to be created are the ones from there. Another part of this is perception. Now, it's not to say that we're all the center of our own universe, but as has been said, time is not linear. It really isn't. And it's sort of a ball of events, to put the Doctor's phrasing a little more properly. It's a ball of events that connects from one to the next through a person, or an object, or a non-person. So, for example, the pen went from the event, from the moment of it being in my hand, to the moment of it bouncing off the desk. However, to someone that's not here, that's pretty irrelevant until the ripples from that event get to them. Now, really, so what that's going to mean is the changes that it made on film are going to make their way to you, and that's going to start altering your events. But up until then, it doesn't really matter. It hardly matters at all, as a matter of fact, because it didn't cause any direct damage. It bouncing off the desk did not really shift the Earth's position at all. So we've got a bundle of events that are sitting in a single time vortex that are all meldable, is the word for it. And the point of being on a fixed vortex, the point of being on a fixed drive is that you will meld those events. If you are on a non-fixed drive, the events you knew when you left the future may not be the same events as when you go back to the future. Now, when you go back to the future in a fixed drive, you may see changes. And the changes are the universe adapting to the changes you've made. Now, you may see something like, if you consider the grandfather paradox, because of the fact that multiverses exist, when you go back in time, kill your grandfather, on an unbounded drive, when you go back to the future, you will never have existed. and you will not have been able to go back and kill your grandfather in that universe, except for the fact that you just appeared out of nowhere and killed your grandfather because you originated from a different universe where you were alive. However, that is on an unbounded drive. On a bounded drive, which again is the only one that's really useful, because with a bounded drive, you are tied to everyone else you've ever met while time traveling. Because they're all from the same continuum, unless they're on unbounded drives, and then you get into a whole different mess. But let's for a second condense this down, maybe like a physicist would, or an economist would, and say that, let's say for example, everybody has bounded drives, so we don't have to worry about the fact that you're splitting off other universes. The point I need to get to here is when the universe corrects for you editing past events, you create stress in the time vortex, because now there are events that are no longer linked to and no longer linkable to. So you create stress, and that's how you start creating cracks in the vortex. You get what are called dead spots. The time vortex is a more or less swirling mass of what I suppose you could call clouds. The droplets in the clouds are events, and them contacting is something moving from one event to the next, to the next, to the next. And that's all shifting around, and that's how you can see something moves from here, and then the event moves over here and contacts another event, and the person transfers from that event to the third event, and the third event floats around and contacts a fourth event, and the person moves from the third event to the fourth event. And it all comes down to you're moving through this, you're making your linear path. The linear path is not set out before you. Anyways, you get dead zones where you have events that nobody is ever going to contact. And so you get portions of the clouds that quit swirling. And so you get lack of time energy conductivity, so time starts to cease to flow. When time starts to cease to flow, space begins to break down because, well, time and space and energy and matter are all very well interlinked by equations that I don't know off the top of my head, and probably really won't ever be able to recite off the top of my head because they're really, really beyond me. Time and space are linked because it is space-time. Things take place in time, and the things that cross space take time, and the only thing that can violate that is if you were traveling in normal space at the speed of light. There are other layers to space where that's not necessarily true. It's all about reference frames, which is Newtonian. That's pretty easy stuff if we're talking on the quantum physics side of things. But that's something to get to later. And I'm reading off something that I wrote a long time ago, but I'm just sort of referencing it occasionally because it's not the most relevant. It's more about creation of the universe. And it was useful when I was talking about creation of multiverses, which, as we've said, when you create the flip-flop, you create the universe, and it creates its own timeline. And it duplicates everything. It duplicates all the events before the moment of quantum flip. So that universe is free to proceed on its own, but its history, if you think of like the mother universe spawning off child universes, you'll come back to a point where the mother universe and the child universe are one and the same. And then a quantum flip happens, and child goes flip and mother goes flop, and those are two different universes that are free to evolve in their own different ways, and they'll spawn off their own little universes on their own. But they are all different timelines. When you're going back along a time stream, you're going back on the vortex of whatever universe you were in, and you can go back to the point where you would be one of the same with the mother universe, but you're not, because they're all different time vortices. It's when universes merge, time vortices merge. When universes split, time vortices split. However, when you're traveling along a time vortex, the splits and merges are immaterial to you. They don't matter. You are stuck in the same universe. Because while the continuum is the continuum, a continuum is specific to a universe and not to the multiverses that it is joined to at any point. Unless, again, unless you are on an unconstrained drive, then you can switch back, because they are one of the same, and the vortices the events from the vortices are one, but when you're coming back out of one, you have already made your string of events backwards, if this makes any sense. You've made a string of events backwards that you've traveled along on the time vortex to get to the past. And to get back to the future, we have to go back, Marty. You will most likely travel along a similar path, and you will travel along the same path if you are on a bounded drive. You'll travel along the same hole in the clouds that you made on the way in, more than likely, and with a fixed drive signature, which is how you make a fixed drive, you will create the same kind of hole and thus be forced along the same channel back towards where you started. And so, to recap, unbounded drive means you can hop back along, hop into other universes, and you will not be violating causality from your point of view. However, you will be from the universe's point of view. You will be violating causality from your point of view. You will not be from a universe's point of view. For a fixed drive, which is the only useful one, really, unless you're flying on your own and you don't care about the people you run into. Fixed drives, you will create stress, which normally will be mitigated. I say stress like it's a bad thing. It might not necessarily be a bad thing. It's just a different path that everyone is now taking. Excuse me. But you'll see on a fixed drive, causality is okay to you because you can hop back to the future and things will be the same. It will just be a different set of events that had to create that same moment. And sometimes those events will violate causality. And that is where the bad stress comes in. Now, you can, for example, let's use the pen analogy. I put my pen on the desk like this. I walk away. I come back, the pen is like this. The same it was. Then I go back in time to before I came back and saw the pen like this, and flip it. And so the pen is now resting on my desk like so. However, I will leave in my time machine before other me gets back. Other me gets back, and the pen is as he left it. Like that. The reason that there isn't a real reason that happens. Okay. So the universe is manifesting that the pen comes out like this, and you're traveling back to the events. You're traveling through a string of events which is now dead. You will have the memory. You will have in your head the memory that you saw the pen like this, even though in reality perhaps the pen was like this. Again, I walk away. I come back. I see the pen as it was. I walk away again, get my time machine, flip the pen before I came back. Now, because it's all memory, in my head at that point, the pen was as it was. The pen was unflipped. However, if I were to go back another time, and this is just creating a bunch of holes, and this is how you start to danger the fabric, put the fabric of the universe in danger. You get, if I were to come back again and see, perhaps at any point after I flipped it, it's like so. It's flipped. Sorry, I may not have flipped it actually. It's flipped, then you're creating breaks in causality. Especially if you wait long enough for the other you to show up, because then you're starting to get into dual memory, and it's when you've traveled through multiple sets of events. And that can be a little bit toying up here, and it can also be a little bit toying to the fabric of the universe, and that's why the TTO exists, and that's why the Time Lords existed as they did, to rectify events like that. Will be the guy that, say, the pen being flipped caused a catastrophic failure, so we'd have to be the ones to come back and fix the pen. Normally the universe would fix itself like that because the universe is pretty fluid, but the big problems is when we have to go back and fix it. Now, I know it's going to take a lot to get a lot out of that, to get anything out of that. And it's really, really complicated, which is what time travel is. You start to get into stuff where things shouldn't be the way they are, and the universe had to fix it because in your memory, that's the way it was. Okay, say I'm running long here. Say there are two people. Pen is flipped. I remember the pen being unflipped. Person comes in and sees the pen flipped. Later, we meet up. I say, was the pen flipped? Was the pen flipped? I say no. They say yes. We're both correct. We went through a different series of events and met at the same point and ended up finding out that, hey, the pen was both flipped and not flipped. And it got flipped after a certain point in its time stream. Okay, this is where it gets interesting. The pen has its own time stream. When I saw it, it was before it got flipped, but when the other person saw it, it was after it got flipped. It doesn't matter if from my point of view, it would have gotten flipped before I saw it, because that's not how it worked out. That's not how I traveled through the events. So again, it's not linear. It's very, very tough to think of it that way, but it's not linear at all. We're the ones that make it linear, and the objects travel through it linearly, but you and the pen and your friend may not follow the same line. If that makes any sense. You may intersect at different points, and that's a lot easier to do. That only makes sense when time travel is involved, usually. And you can have other problems relating to that, but normally it's when time travel is involved. So, in short, you would change the future of your own universe. However, you are only changing it for the people that are there for it. You've got a whole different series of events that never happened. You're creating stress in the universe, which is why these kinds of things need to be rectified, because if you create too much stress, the vortex will break down. And that happens a lot on fixed points. Fixed points are not necessarily a end-all, be-all point thing that has to happen. What they are an event that a lot of different things link to. And when you violate that event, you start screwing with a lot of different causalities, and you create a lot of dead zones. And those dead zones, if it is a true fixed point, that means those dead zones will lead to the collapse of the universe, and that manifests itself in a lot of different ways. But that is it for me. I have run a little bit long today. So to answer the question in short, depends on what kind of drive you have. You're either creating new universes or you're creating one with a new timeline. Keep in mind, most proper drives are fixed, although it doesn't really matter to someone that isn't time traveling. And the only time they're useful for rectifying problems. They're useful for rectifying problems because you can go back and fix something to the point where the universe will be able to pull it all the way over and fix it so that when you get back, things are as you remember it. The universe tries to keep a balance, tries to keep it so that even if someone else experienced something differently, when you reach a point, you will most likely have had the same experiences. Again, that takes a lot of time and a lot of energy that the universe has trouble manifesting itself in that way. Events sort of float out there, and these events all have different sort of energy states associated with them, and when you're jumping from one energy state to another without the intermediate steps, that's not good. That's what sometimes happens because the attraction between them is too great by a lot of people or a lot of things going from one event to the next. And so you create a whole bunch of intermediate states and void a whole bunch of other intermediate states, and that's, again, how dead zones are created. So that's how you would theoretically be altering your own timeline, but you may be traveling into dead events if you try to jump forward and see what's going on. and that means you wouldn't be altering your own timeline. You'd be altering a different one that other people are visiting, and that if you manage to get into that timeline, because again, when you're time traveling, you pinpoint an event and you travel to that event, usually, unless you screw up. You pinpoint an event, you travel to that event, you may or may not reach that event, but if you successfully reach that event, you've reached it, and it doesn't matter what events it connects to. So you're able to permeate dead zones and form connections, and that's how you fix the universe. So that's it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this shoddy explanation, and I know I really didn't answer the question, because technically creating universes in universes that eventually merge together and form new ones, universes in vortices, or multiple universes in a vortex, multiple timelines in a single vortex, which can happen and is not good for the universe. So with a bounded drive, with a fixed drive, you are altering your own future, and the universe has to compensate for that. So that's the answer to the question after 26 and some odd minutes. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you again in 2 weeks. Remember to post any questions, including follow-up questions, in the description, not in the description, in the comments, and I will see them, and I will do my best to answer them. So, with that, I hope somebody was keeping notes, because there will be a test afterwards. Just kidding. Keep on staring at the stars.